Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the future of DEI and staffing. We've got a good bunch of people that registered for this, so we're going to give people a few minutes to get into their seats as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping while we're doing that. We are expecting to go for most of the full hour on this, but we want it to be really interactive. We've got three amazing panelists. And so if you have questions, you can put them into the chat, which we'll be monitoring. You can also put them into the Q&A tab, which we'll be monitoring as well. And so please, make sure to go ahead and do that. We are recording, and while we don't have a lot of slides, we do have a few slides as well. So we will be sharing those slides out after this session as well, so you have a chance to engage in that manner. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get everything started here. I want to make sure that we make the most of the time that we have together. And so I'm going to just ask in the chat, what is a word that describes how you're feeling about the current state of DEI in our industry today? So if you just want to take a second and put that word into the chat, I'm going to ask our panelists to answer that question as well. So I'll have them hold back on there. But if you are comfortable sharing, if you want to share the word that describes how you feel about DEI. Uncertainty came through. Mine is pensive. I feel like I feel like there's maybe some opportunity here, but I'm also feeling a lot of the same things that we're seeing here: deflated, concerned, unsteady, uncertain. So that's a big part of why we're having the conversation today. And I'm thrilled to have some people engaging in the chat, and I hope that you'll all continue to do that as well. So with that, I want to start by introducing our panelists today. We have three amazing panelists. I'm going to start with Myra Briggs, and Myra is the DEI Talent Sourcing Advisor at the Inter-American Development Bank. She leads initiatives that drive diversity, equity, and inclusion across 48 member countries. She's also the founder and lead at MTB Leadership Labs, where she provides strategic advising, executive coaching, leadership development services, and the like to associations and mission-driven organizations. Myra, I'm so thrilled. I've already learned so much just in our prep calls and getting to know you a little bit. What's the one word that describes how you're feeling on the current state of DEI?
I'm so happy I'm going first. Vigilant is my word, I would say.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, give me just a little bit more around that. I think that's a great word.
Yeah, I think, based upon our prep conversations, you probably have a little bit of context. It's really me just feeling more strengthened by core values, more strengthened by sort of what we know it is going to take to get us through this difficult time. And I just feel even more not to use a word to define a word, but even more vigilant in my quest and commitment to seeing to it that a lot of the principles that are kind of on the chopping block right now don't die.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great choice. Next, I'd like to introduce Haley Jones. She's the Director of Member Engagement at the American Staffing Association, where she plays an integral role in the development and management of ASA's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. She also is a lead on a lot of their programs that they do for the industry. So she has a really unique perspective, being able to not only sort of look through the lens of what ASA and what the industry is doing, but also looking through the lens and seeing into what individual firms are doing that's working and not working. Haley, welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of the call today. What is the word that you would choose?
Hi. Oh, well, thanks for having me. And my word is not as positive as Myra's, but mine is actually polarized. I think that um, the definition of DEI has just been flipped on its head so much. It's become such a bad word, just in general. So I'm going with polarized.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk about that, right? Because a lot of what this group has been talking about is how we do the work and how we talk about the work. And both matter a lot right now. So we'll get into more detail on that, but I like where your head is on that as well. Last but certainly not least, DeLibra Wesley, founder and CEO of National Recruiting Consultants, which is a leading provider of temporary healthcare and education talent to schools and learning organizations. She's also the founder and a member of the advisory board for the Women of Color in Staffing. She's an ASA board member, and really one of the most inspiring leaders that I know. DeLibra, there isn't a person probably in this industry that's had a greater positive influence on me as a person. And I mean that very, very sincerely. So I grow a little bit every time we spend time together, and I'm thrilled that you were willing to participate in this call as well. What's the one word that you would choose?
Well, thank you, Eric. You're so sweet. My word would be evolving.
Okay, talk just a little bit about that.
I think I wanted to go down a path when I was thinking about what word I would choose that could be positive or negative because we're in a space where it's a little bit of both, in my opinion. It's our chance to continue the fight, but continue it in a different manner. But also the outward appearance of it, the marketing behind it, the angst behind the letters DEI has definitely changed the game. But I think the work itself won't change as much. Just maybe how we go about it will. So I chose evolving. And I was like, man, I don't want to go last. I was afraid I'd have my word taken, but I made it.
That's right. Three unique takes, some overlap, and I think the emotion behind those. But I love it. I thought that's a really good way to kick things off. So thank you to each of you. I wanted to start with just a little bit of the data behind this, and also thanking our sponsors, ASA, the ASA Idea Group, and ClearEdge. All helped us to really promote this discussion and continue to really put their efforts behind the importance of this topic. So thank you so much to each of our sponsors there as well. So let's just look at the numbers, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I want to spend most of our time in the conversation, but it is important to understand just sort of how our industry, internal employees, identify themselves. And what we can see here is the green bar is the industry, and then the orange kind of rectangle outline is what BLS reports for the overall US workforce. So for example, we have 67% of our industry that identifies as female. That is significantly higher than just slightly less than half of the overall US workforce that identifies as female. So we tend to index significantly towards females. We're younger. We have a significant portion, over half of our portion of our employees are between the ages of 26 to 40. About 2/3 are under the age 40 or younger. So we tend to skew a little bit younger than the overall workforce. And then when we look at some of the other ways that people identify themselves, about 5% identify as LGBTQIA+. Almost 7% single parents or guardians, 22% or parent or guardian with dependents in the home, 2.6% veteran, little under 2% identifies physically abled, 2.4% identifies another disability, and just under 1% have a felony or similar conviction. So a really diverse population are internal employees in this space. And so I thought I would kind of combine a few things and look at the intersection here and so I wanted to share, 68% of the industry's women, 67, 68%, 21% are women of color, significantly higher than the US workforce, 47% are white women, also higher than the US workforce. When we look at men of color, you can see men of color is pretty similar to the US workforce, significantly fewer white males than the US workforce as well. And so one of the things that we look at, and I've shown this before, some of you will have seen this, but if everything was equal, right, we would say, okay, if we had 35% of the US workforce were white women, then we would see, if it's 47%, in our industry, then we would expect to see 47% all the way through the executive level. And we do see that to the director level, but then we see it drop off. And so when we look at BIPOC women, 21%. So if we had perfect equity in this industry, then we would expect the executive and the director level also to be represented by 21% BIPOC women. And we clearly don't see that happen, right? It drops in half at the director level and stays at that level for the executive space as well. When we look at male counterparts, similarly, right? If we have 21% white men in this industry, we would expect 21% in the director level and in the executive level roles. We don't see that, right? We have about 44% of executives are white male. And then when we look at men of color, we can see it does maintain fairly closely in that mode, right? 10.5% across the industry overall, 10.1% director level, and 8% executive level. So this is a really important thing for us to note because there's a difference between attracting and retaining talent in these different groups and giving that talent the same opportunity to advance and to step into leadership roles. When we look at turnover, what we see is a couple of things. Those that identify as Black had a 1.5x higher turnover rate than those that don't in the last year that we had the numbers for this. LGBTQIA plus turned over at 1.2 times higher than the average. Those that identify themselves as having a physical or other disability turned over at 1.3 times higher. And single parents turned over at 1.3 times higher. Now, it's important to note that this is all turnover. So this is voluntary and involuntary turnover in that year, but you can see that there are some groups that were disproportionately impacted in the last year with turnover, and obviously impacts our ability to have representation that looks like the U.S. Workforce in many of these spaces. So I wanted to do a quick poll, and so we'll see now. I was talking with DeLibra when we got on here about how nervous I get on these polls, but we'll see if I can actually launch this poll. I think you should see it up now. The question is, how is your organization changing their approach to DEI based on the current administration's policies? And so I want to see, how folks answer this. This is actually a question. We'll give you about 60 seconds to answer it. It's actually a question that the SIA asked recently, and I'll share with you the SIA results here pretty shortly as well, but was very interested to see the difference and what we can see as an industry. And then I'm anxious to see if there's any difference in the reporting on this. So we'll give people maybe just another 10 seconds here. If you haven't participated in the poll, go ahead and do so. And then we'll show the results here as well. So I'm going to share the results on this. What we can see is actually nobody on this call said that they ceased the DEI related programs. About 13% saw some reduction or a drastic reduction, and about 67% said that they saw no change. And about 7%, which is small numbers on this, but 7% said that they saw some increasing in the DEI related sort of as a counter result to what they're seeing there as well. And so as we look at this and we look at the data here, what we can see is that about 75%, so pretty similar to what we saw in the poll, 75% said that they were seeing no changes. Only 1% said that they were seeing increases. And about 24% were seeing some kind of a decrease based on the policies, with about 12% sort of ceasing completely as a part of it. So before we go, any deeper on this, I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to bring now my panel into this and kind of have a conversation here. So, I talk with this data so much with you, DeLibra. It's only appropriate that we start with you. What do you see in this data? What stands out to you in what I shared here?
I think the data is so impactful, and I know you and I have talked about this before. It's what really brought me into a deeper understanding on our industry and how we fall when it comes to diversity. The truth is in the data, and so I think the big thing for me lies around the turnover rate for Blacks, and I think that I've noticed this years before, and this has been the driving force behind this particular statistic behind starting women of color in staffing, just trying to find a place for people to be able to network, get to know each other, be around people that are having similar experiences instead of leaving the industry as a whole. It's such a great industry. I love it. And so I try to find ways to share that with people, especially BIPOC people, just because you may not have it within your individual organization. So I would say the turnover data is still alarming to me. And second to that, of course, is the women and the lack of leadership rise, knowing that we're such a big percentage of the industry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Haley, you've been doing this work for years and been a part of this. You've seen shifts before. How does this feel different? What you're seeing in sort of the current state of DEI versus maybe other shifts that you've witnessed or been a part of?
I feel like it's definitely been a pendulum swing. I think we just went very extreme in one direction right now. I always refer to it as the loud minority of people who are either against it and usually out of a place of ignorance or misunderstanding. I think like in 2020, everybody all of a sudden was starting to add diversity positions, CDOs, like tacking on DEI to an already existing vacancy. Sometimes you could tell if it was either a performative action or if it was something that was truly genuine and they had been doing it for a while. Maybe they just happen to have a vacancy. But I think we went from in 2020, this reckoning because it was in everyone's face. You had nothing else to do or stuck at home, and we all watched a man be killed on camera. And then everyone started believing what, and I'm for this, I would specifically say for what Black people and other minorities were saying, like it's not safe for us, and we don't get these opportunities and X, Y, and Z. And then now, to me, it's a lot more difficult because now all of a sudden we're having to prove why this is important. That I think in the media, when they're referring to DEI, I think they're mostly talking about racial and ethnic minorities. Um, and where the misunderstanding comes is like there's so many protected classes that encompass DEI, and that part's kind of getting lost, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I think it really is, and it felt like the pressure was on not necessarily doing the work, but are you getting credit for doing the work, right? And that actually inspired some firms, I will say, to do the work, right? They started maybe for not the right reason, or they started because of they felt the pressure and they started to do that work. But unfortunately now, that same pressure is being applied in the opposite direction. And we're seeing, those that aren't really committed to the importance of it walk that all back, right? So Myra, we're reading about different companies walking back DEI, the work that encompasses. Is that headlines only? How do we read that? We saw in this data that 75% said that nothing was changing. That's maybe the optimistic view. The pessimistic view is 25% said that it's decreasing, some significantly. So how do you read what's going on and what's headlines versus really the impact on these programs?
One of the things we'll talk about later is sort of my integration of happiness science and wellness and all of that into the work that I do. But I was recently at a meeting, the World Happiness Summit, actually, and they put up the glass that looks like it could be half full, half empty, depending upon your view of whatever the thing is. And the idea here is that the glass is full. It's half full of air and it's half full of liquid, right? And I think we could very easily apply that same eliminating whether you see the glass half full or half empty as it pertains to the headlines that we may be seeing. Believe what you're seeing, right? There are organizations that are pulling back completely. I mean, I have friends that work in different industries where a lot of documentation is involved, and they've had to go through, very tedious tasks of, places where people were allowed to choose their pronouns, actually being forced into identifying she or he, as opposed to using they in scenarios where folks had the autonomy to do so. So there are things happening like that. I think people should definitely believe what they're reading. But I also think that we can remain hopeful by the statistics that we even saw on this call today, right? That there are so many that are saying that nothing has changed. And I'm a firm believer that, you can't really watch the leaves. You have to pay attention to the branches. You know what I mean? And if you are really paying attention to things that are rooted a little bit deeper, then I think that we will not be so inclined to kind of, as my grandmother would say, be tossed to and fro, right? Depending upon what's happening. So, yes, there are things happening. Yes, believe what you're seeing. It's not good. There is an attack on DEI 100%. But one of the things that I want people to do is to sort of double down on what your core values are, double down on the things that you are seeing that are remaining, double down on the things that are really central to the way that you do your work that don't necessarily need a title or sort of a philosophy to explain them, as much as I do my work with integrity and this is the result, right? I think if we can sort of go back to a place where people did their work with integrity, without any unnecessary ego. I think you need a little bit of pride in your work, right? But without any unnecessary ego, I think we recognize that a lot of the framing that we have done of the good work has been for the sake of the performative things that we're beginning to see. So I think it's a yes, and yes, things are probably as bad or maybe even as worse than they seem, or are worse than they seem in many cases. But what's inside of you hasn't changed. What's in your immediate orbit hasn't changed. What you're doing, what you're impacting has not changed. And so I think that we should definitely renew the faith that we have in those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually a nice transition into kind of, how staffing firms can adapt and should adapt.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to stay with you. I thought it was really interesting and some of the intersection that you talk about between this work and really just culture building, or this work and happiness and well-being. And I thought it was really interesting if you sort of went from a team building standpoint and you said, okay, we need a team. What are going to be key components of a team? Well, we want that team to not be all the same, right? We want diversity of thought, of experiences, of things like that. Okay, well, that most people would check. Yes, that's important. So, then the next piece of that, in my opinion, would be, okay, well, let's make sure that people are actually bringing those ideas to bear, right? And that's the inclusivity piece. And then it's like, okay, well, now let's make sure that as we look at this, we're actually giving everybody the same opportunities to excel in that. And that's the equity piece. And those would all, I think, with very little debate, be good components of a strong team. So talk a little bit about culture, which is not really polarizing, versus DEI, which is polarizing, and maybe where you see the crossover on those.
If we can take it back to relationships, right? I'm married. I don't know how many people on this call are married, but there are times when my husband and I realize that we are deadlocked on what we are calling something. We are deadlocked in an argument because of what one of us has, the word that one of us has used to identify something. And once we were able to figure out that that word meant something completely different to both of us, and at the end of the day, what we were actually trying to say was the same thing,
Yeah.
we realized that we were closer than we ever had been before with whatever this particular thing is, right? There are a lot of debates. DEI is the biggest one right now. The term BIPOC is a huge one that is polarizing for people, and a number of others. And so if I am the one that is tasked with sort of trying to find the commonality in the group, trying to weave a common thread between the core values that we have in the room so that we can begin to approach consensus on something. I'm throwing all of the terms out because nobody knows what any of that means, right? You know what it means to you, but unless we have a glossary where we are clearly defining all of these different things for one another so that we can use them effectively, I think what we really need to do is draw back a bit and just speak in plain terms about what we're trying to accomplish. During our prep session, I think we used an analogy where you're not going to come to any person, right? Regardless of their background, a white man, a Black woman, a Hispanic woman, and say, so are you telling me that we're no longer hiring qualified people regardless of their background? No one's going to say yes. As of January 20th, we're no longer doing that. It's over. We're no longer hiring qualified people regardless of their background, right?
Yep.
But if you ask someone, what are our DEI policies, or around hiring, that makes everyone say, oh gosh, okay. So first of all, I don't even know if we're allowed to talk about DEI. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is talk about what philosophy, what common core values are we going to use as we are hiring people to join this team. So say that, right? Say that. We say this a lot, people hear it, call a thing a thing. Call it what it is. Like sometimes the shortcuts are what's getting us in trouble. And I think in 2020, we had this massive bubbling up of energy of amazing people wanting to do something about horrible things that happen. And people that might not have been as amazing, but they were smart enough to know that they could not be seen as not amazing and wanting to be a part of whatever was happening. And as a result of that, all of these people that didn't know what to do needed an umbrella to fall under, and we called it DEI. Right. And now that it's not really raining anymore, it wasn't raining for a while, we didn't need the umbrella. And now it's raining pigs, and we've pulled the umbrella back out, and no one is comfortable being under there anymore because we just didn't know why we were under there in the first place. Right. And so that's kind of a convoluted way to get us back to a place where we're really just speaking in plain terms about what we're hoping to accomplish. And I think in that space, we will find that we are more often than not trying to do the exact same things.
Yeah. The goals are more aligned than they maybe seem on the DeLibra. I think you are passionate about all of these topics, but you're also a pragmatist, right? You would rather get more done and make more progress than to kind of connect on any one thing. Should we be talking about DEI? Are we giving up too much if we go away from that term, or is it important to go away from that term and maybe, as Myra's saying, really sort of realign around the principles of it and let the term sunset?
Unfortunately, I'm starting to believe and think that we don't really have a choice in that matter.
Yeah.
So you make a good point. I'm a business owner, and the most important thing for me to do right now so that I can continue to find ways to help people is stay in business. And so from that perspective, many of us in this industry staff in government. A lot of our clients have government funding. And so some things are being pressed upon us as business owners and leaders to make changes that we may not necessarily agree with. So I do have to be pragmatic about it. I want to make sure that this organization still exists so that I can do things like women of color in staffing, or find ways to bring someone along that may not have an opportunity otherwise. But if I dig my heels in on this particular thing, it may have an adverse effect to what I'm trying to do. So I am of the mindset at this point that we may have to show a little grace to the owners of staffing companies and to this industry, because there isn't a lot of room to dig your heels in 100% and say, I'm not changing anything about the way that I'm doing it. If your revenue and if the bottom line is tied to it, it's kind of difficult. So I've had instances so far where I've talked to people who've had to remove certifications off of their websites. I've heard of agreements where you have to sign certain things that you may not be comfortable with, as morally it may not be okay for me to do, but as an organization, to make sure that we still have the funds and I'm able to do the things that like Myra is speaking on, focusing more on our culture and our core values, because deep in your core values, most of us all have them in our organizations.
That's right.
This is already embedded. And so whether we call it DEI or not, rather you make me scrub my website and look for the words inclusive or DEI. Fundamentally, that's the leader that I am, and that's the organization
right.
that I run, and that's how we're going to continue to operate, no matter what you call it. But I am pragmatic enough to realize in order to stay in business, I have to, and some other organizations may have to as well. So I want us to be mindful of the companies that have to make marketing changes but are still doing the work. Now, there are some that are making marketing changes, but they weren't doing the work anyway. It was all performance. So that is what it is. But there are a core group of us. The numbers were actually encouraging to me, because I've only heard so much negativity. To see that 67% of us are still going after this and 75% on the other survey is optimistic to me. So
yeah, and I hope that people can kind of take those stats back to their organizations, right? To help, if there's discussion around like, oh, we have to do this, like, well, that's not the majority. The majority of people are continuing the course, whatever that course was. And so if you have somebody, a leader that is saying, hey, we're getting rid of everything that we're doing here, and we're doing that because everybody's doing that, that's not really true. And actually, Haley, I want to bring you in here because I think you have a really good perspective on this. You get to engage with a lot of different leaders around what they're doing and what's happening in the space. What are some of the things that you're seeing happen right now, firms that you maybe admire, that are kind of meeting the moment but also continuing to do the work? What are they doing differently than others?
I honestly, I think the biggest thing is just, it's kind of to DeLibra's point in communicating that we might be forced to outwardly change words and verbiage, but we're still doing the important work. I think that's just an important piece in all of this. Like, we unfortunately are being forced to play a not so fun game, and businesses trying to stay afloat, trying to maintain their clients. I have heard directly from some of our members about kind of toying with the idea of removing their certifications, whether they're MBE or WeBank certified, and wanting to remove that because they feel like it's a hit. It'll be a detriment to their business. I mean, that's really unfortunate, and I think we've definitely seen people kind of changing words around and maybe focusing on core values rather than saying, oh, we're focusing on DEI. I've also seen others who are saying, say the words and don't say the letters, because the letters became a 4-letter word, but say the words, especially if someone is saying that they're against it. Like, explain to me why you're against diversity, equity, inclusion. Which one bothers you? Um, but I do think just what I'm seeing, it's refreshing for that's the survey results. And I think it's important for people to read about what the companies are actually doing. I always use Target as an example. I think they're kind of the poster child about what's been going on lately. And when they initially, I felt like they were doubling down initially on not changing their policies, and then not 2 days later, they rolled everything back and they put out this belonging at the bullseye statement, which was their new, I'll say their replacement to what their DEI initiatives were. And they admitted themselves, I don't know if they realized they did it, that their work was performative post George Floyd because it was in Minnesota and that's where they're based. So I think it's important though to look into that, so that you do see, like DeLibra was saying, there are companies that are going to have to change something, but if they're still doing the work, they're just trying to survive right now. That's what they have to do.
Yeah, I want to, we do have a question in the Q&A tab that I want to bring to this group, which is what are the most critical components that of the three words, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. What are the most critical components that must remain? And what's your opinion on that? And Myra, I'll start with you, and then DeLibra and Haley, I'll give you guys a chance to give a quick kind of addition to that.
Okay. Well, okay. So, I'm the problem child. So I would probably add different words that Um, for me, agency is so important these days. We've talked so much about empowerment, and I mean, anybody that watches reality TV, I mean, if we hear about another women's empowerment brunch, Jesus, right? So the word empowerment has lost a little bit of its zhuzh for me, but agency is so important. It's not just about giving people access. It's not just about create including them, but agency is really sort of giving them the tools to contribute once they do get that seat at the table, right? And I think to me, agency is a thing that is so powerful and it covers so many different things that it should be one of the things for sure that we're keeping as we're thinking about, because I think it's coming up in sponsorship, mentorship, and all of the wonderful things that are coming out of many of the DEI initiatives. I'm gonna keep using it. I'm one of those people. What the DEI initiatives, I think agency has been a fabulous byproduct of those who are doing it right, where people are really beginning to gain the confidence as well as sort of the, again, using a word to define a word, agency to contribute and shift and make changes. It's sort of that leading from your seat concept.
Yeah. DeLibra, what would you add to that?
I would say in the out of the three words, diversity, equity, inclusion, just fresh off of the data we just saw,
Yeah.
I would say the focus would need to be on equity. When you see the fact that we have a pretty diverse workforce in staffing, 67% women. I'd never seen the felony statistic before, which was cool to see.
Yeah, me either. Yeah.
But there is something so broken because it's still broken. No matter we've done so much work around this, and there's still so much to do. Look at the turnover rate. Look at the lack of rising within the organizations or within the industry for women. Um, so I'm concerned because I'm hearing the rebirth of meritocracy. And so
Mhm.
I worry with that, we're taking away the importance of equity because when most organizations look at meritocracy, they focus on equality. I'm going to give you this is your how to book and go, and the best person will succeed. And that's not necessarily how things work. With equity, we all start in different positions. We all need something different to succeed. And it's just not a black and white. You can't just hand out a textbook of how to staff. We need to really understand each individual's challenges and make sure that we support them. And that piece, even in the parenting numbers, equity, in my opinion, is where we still have to focus. So I'm with you, Haley. I mean, I'm going to start. What do you don't like equity? Like, which word is it?
Well, and I think I remember, DeLibra, you and I having a conversation where you were talking about, taking a leadership call as you were going to pick up your son, and how pre-pandemic that would have been sort of unheard of, right? But, that was a really critical thing for you to be able to succeed as a leader and succeed with what you needed to do for your family. And so you're right. When we look at this, we lose out on a lot of talent because we sort of set the standard at what, candidly, what the typical white male needs. And that's not the same criteria that everybody needs. But I want to make sure we got about 20 minutes left. I want to make sure that we you talked about agency, Myra, and I want to make sure that we give people what they need to be able to make the impact in their personal lives. So maybe they're not the ones setting the strategy. Maybe they're not driving this work at their organization because they're not in a leadership position. Doesn't mean that they can't do things. And let's start by just making it known that like we have a really diverse population, to DeLibra's point, but it doesn't feel like that in each and every individual firm. And so, Haley, I'm going to start with you. What are some organizations? I'll bring some up on the screen. But what are some organizations that you think people can get involved with that can do the work, but also provide that community?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our programs for anyone who's a member. I'm an ASA with the Idea Group and Women in Leadership interest group. They're open to anyone, and it's a great way, honestly, to even if you say you're a man who's wants to kind of hear what women are going through in the industry. Women in Leadership is a great place to start. For anyone, for the Idea Group, it's just good to it's a community of people who are either doing the work or they're interested in it. And then we obviously have Women of Color and Staffing, which is open to allies, and our membership there is free. But I think that uh, you know, empathy goes a long way, and I think going to these places to figure out, kind of hear the pain points for these different groups of folks, or just in the industry in general, I think it's helpful to go there and maybe listen to understand. But there are ways to get involved that don't necessarily involve being a leader at your organization. I'm literally speaking in like 3 weeks on a panel about leading DEI from where you sit, whether you're a coordinator or you're a CEO, because everyone can play some kind of a role. I'd also recommend we do a lot of work with the Office of Disability Employment Policy. They have incredible resources on their website that take you through the recruitment, hiring, retaining processes with candidates, with people that you might be hiring internally. I think that is a great place you might hear things that might be very simple, but and easy to accommodate, but something that maybe you just didn't think about. So I would definitely recommend checking their website out, and I can drop a few links in the chat for that, because I think that's kind of in this whole conversation about DEI, they tend to be a forgotten population. They 2020 kind of had this uprising in disability employment because we were all at home, and it removed a barrier for people with disabilities who may not physically be able to get into an office or may have a struggle with that. So definitely something to check out.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And what I will say on this too is that, like, if you are an ally within one of these groups, whether you're just want to support that community or learn more about that community or be a part of that community, it's a great way to get involved. But additionally, if you are a leader or you plan to be a leader, it probably makes sense to understand how women experience this industry. It's going to make you a more effective leader because 2/3 of your workforce is likely to be female in this industry. And so I think that there's multiple reasons why these groups matter a lot, not just for the communities that they are there to support, but also for those that are actively in a position where they can support those communities. So I just encourage people to really think of that in there as well. And actually, Myra, I'm going to go to you. One of the challenges we have is getting allies to engage. We have a few on this call today, which I was thrilled with. But what would you say holds allies back, and what are maybe some ideas that can help people in engaging people who could be good allies but maybe aren't stepping up in the same way?
Sure. Honestly, I think the would-be ally is probably only deterred by thinking that they might be violating the sort of sanctity of the space by coming into it, honestly. I mean, a person who's even considering how they could support a mission and hesitating is already an ally. So I want the people that are thinking of it to know that you're already in the right headspace. You literally just have to go and ask the question. I've had people, I do a number of different events. I've done brunches that have been for women, and I've had white women ask me in the room, I don't want to overstep if this is a space that is centered for Black women. And I'll let them know, first of all, thank you. But you were invited here, and you are, welcome just as anyone else is. However, I do think that it is prudent to ask the question if you feel that it is necessary to do so, because there are a lot of spaces that are centered for a specific group. And it's important for you to know if you're there as a participant or an ally. And by simply asking the question, you will never offend a group of people who you are supposed to be a part of. Already having the thought means you're already an ally. Go show your support, ask how you can show up in a way that is beneficial. That's literally all it is. I cannot think of a person who is thinking of helping, and that's not the reason that they don't.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because on one of the first Women of Color in Staffing events that I attended, and DeLibra knows I've told this story before, I felt very out of place, and I felt very much like, oh gosh, like what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I'm going to be seen as as not belonging here, and as encroaching on this wonderful community that I really just want to support and to be a part of. And I was telling my wife this, and she's like, I think that actually that's probably how a lot of Black women feel every single day when they walk into their office and there's no other Black women around, or there, and I'm like, oh God, that's actually a super healthy thing on empathy wise, to realize that
Sure,
it takes some practice being the only one that looks different in a room, full stop.
it does. Yeah,
And to experience that gives a whole different realm to how you would try to make somebody feel welcome if they're in that position, and you're the one that's there on that as well. So one of the many
absolutely.
things that I've learned from from my wife. But
It's
so
refreshing to hear that, though. It's
I
refreshing to hear
know.
those kinds of
Yeah,
stories where you
yeah,
can actually put yourself in our shoes in a different kind
yeah,
of way, but
yeah.
understand
yeah.
it a little bit more.
And it's
That's right.
really, and I also say that I'm also keenly aware of like the slight sort of discomfort or dilemma that I was feeling of like not belonging is a fraction of what a lot of people feel on a much more regular basis. So I want to be careful that I also don't commingle
No,
those two
sure. Yeah.
feelings completely. But it does, if you're never in that position, which a lot of us are very rarely in that position, finding an opportunity to put yourself in the position of being the one that's less like the rest of the community, or at least outwardly less like the rest of the community, is a really important step to understanding that. I want to talk a little bit about the future now of DEI and staffing. And yeah, I'm going to start, Haley, with you. And what do you imagine this conversation looks like 3 years from now? And maybe give how you imagine it, and then how you hope it to be. And yeah, I would love kind of your take on that, and maybe the path to get there. It's a big
Ooh,
question.
I think, well, 3 years from now, we might still be talking like this. It's my hope that there is a maybe if the not to get political, but if the other side, those who are against what DEI actually is, if they could take a breath and actually listen and learn and understand what it means, and the fact that if it's done correctly, it helps literally everybody. Um, my hope is that at some point everyone just has it as sort of second nature. That won't be in 3 years, but it is a hope down the line. I always use the curb cut effect as an example, as like this is something that was meant to benefit one community, but it benefits so many different people. And and that's because it was done correctly. And the fact that people are just so against this, I don't understand that. So yeah, my hope is that maybe there's a little more understanding going on and a little less flipping the acronym into negative words. And you know, I just, my hope is that we don't go all the way back to like the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And I think that I'll add to that kind of my hope on this is that we can get to a place where we don't have to we don't have to look through the lens of, is somebody a victim or are they a perpetrator? And we can kind of go through this and recognize in both cases, like one of the most powerful trainings that I've been a part of is just around the unconscious bias piece of that. And I think a lot of white males have a hard time specifically looking at this and not feeling like, and getting, defensive, right? Of like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing these things. I would never view in that way. And getting to the point where we can say, yes, I will never intentionally do that. Yet it's very natural, right, for all of us to naturally have this tribalistic instinct to surround ourselves with people that look like the community that we're already a part of and to act like the community that we're already a part of. And so we just have to fight that, right? It's not that you've done anything wrong. It's just that we all come with a certain set of biases, and we have to kind of, take that piece. And I think if we can get to the point where we're really, Haley, to your point, committing to the belief in equity, the belief that diverse teams outperform, the belief that we want an inclusive team, and build from there and look at what keeps us from having that. That's a much healthier place to be. And Myra, I want to bring you in on this because this is, I think, the place where this wellness, happiness, and health, the intersection there is really powerful. So how does this impact kind of the future of DEI in your opinion?
I think honestly, it takes it to the place where I kind of started this conversation, where it's no longer a concept that has to be called out as much as it. In this, I don't see this happening in 3 years. Let me be
Yeah.
clear about that. But I think it becomes embedded, right? I think it really does become a part of the way we do our work. I think it's a thing where we no longer need a DEI budget because everybody's doing DEI, right? I mean, no matter what your role is, there are certain performance metrics that are tied to the work of being integral, essentially, right? That we are not forcing it, but we are making it mandatory. And there are certain things like coming to work and doing the work that you were hired to do that are not necessary, that are mandatory, but you don't see them as such because it's what you came to work to do. It's why you accepted the job. It's why you do the work. And I think eventually, in its perfect state, that the quest to happiness and wellness and all of those things is going to force people more into just being people when they come to work, as opposed to needing sound bites to have real conversations, as opposed to us needing a predefined philosophy in order for us to sit down and figure out what's the right way to treat people. I think that we will finally get back to a place where the same conversations we're having around our kitchen table about what's the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, we are still those people when we come to work. And we're no longer driven by the bottom line as much as we're driven by the fact that we are stewards over the portion of people's lives that takes up the most time and energy, right? And that if you are a business owner, all of the people that are working for you are securing your family's legacy and future. And so you owe them something in addition to their paycheck, which is a safe and healthy place to work and the ability for them to create some type of legacy like that for their families as well.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to say that. And I think that one of the things that you bring up is it's not an either or, right? I mean,
No.
it's ultimately the advice that we would give a leader on building a really healthy, engaged, low turnover staff that outperforms is the same advice that we would give somebody who's asking how do they increase, their commitment to some of the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's right.
So DeLibra, I'm going to leave with you, and then if we have any additional questions, I've asked a few of them as we've gone through here, but if we have any additional questions from the audience, we'll try to take those as well. But what advice do you have for those in the audience that are tired, that are demoralized? How do we encourage people to keep fighting for these principles while also making sure that we're honoring the things that Myra's talking about too, around sort of health and happiness and own personal wellness? Where do you navigate that?
I think I'll just tell a little bit about how I've handled it for myself because it is a bit of a personal thing. Um, so it may not be a big surprise, but I was part of the 92%. So the election did not go the way that I intended. And I was extremely upset and disheartened because I think right now some people are shocked at some of the legislation and policy changes that we're seeing. But I believed what our president campaigned on is what he would do. So I was upset right away because I thought, there would be swift changes, especially regarding DE&I, and there have been. So for me, I had to figure out things that I can hold on to and do and make an impact on and feel as if I'm still making a difference. And I've done things around my household about, regarding where I choose to spend my money because I say I voted and the vote didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. Not to be political, but you also vote with your
Mhm.
time and your money. So
That's right.
I made choices. My family and I made choices along that path. No Target in this household,
Same.
unfortunately. And what Haley, you and Haley were discussing the organizations, like figuring out, even if it's only one thing where you can say, I'm going to go and make an impact and do this one thing. For me, women of color in staffing is such an amazing group of people that I feel like it's home. Um,
Mhm.
and so finding some kind of community right now in history, this is when communities have been like the strongest. We need each
Right.
other right now. So finding places that you can go and relate to someone. Also, a big piece of this for me has been about my mental health. And for me, I have made an interesting shift to where I'm barely watching TV. I do not watch the news. I figured out that it was very triggering for me and I was constantly upset and I was feeling like just demoralized, like you said, and depressed. So, but I did figure out if I read the news, I can remove the emotion. I don't have to listen to certain voices and certain inflections that upset me. And I can still get the knowledge and understand what was going on in our country and across the world. So, like, I totally doubled down on news. I bought the Apple News app so I can, and now I like look at I try to find sources and I subscribe to sources that are not left or right leaning and trying to find something in the middle where I can get the facts, but just like finding what triggers you, figuring out what your triggers are if you have them, and
Yeah.
if this is really upsetting for you at times, and then finding a way to combat that. So for me, like the biggest thing that I could do was stop watching the news. And I know that sounds like some people are probably like, what? I couldn't anymore. But reading the news, I still get the information that I need. I get it pushed to me, and it's not for whatever reason as upsetting, and I can understand what's going on in the world this way. So.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's a
Healthcare, however you can get it.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that's a really good and healthy approach. And I think I'll just finish this because we only have a couple minutes left. And what I'll say is that I think that um, we need community support full stop in this industry right now. We're on month 30 of a decline, right? And whether, you'll hear people say, well, I think we actually find that we've been in a recession. Well, the staffing industry full stop has been in a recession since, Q4 of 2022. So we've got all of this social change that is really hard for a lot of us. And on top of that, like, our jobs are harder and the business is harder and growth is harder and getting to our goals is harder. And so really lean in on community. There's been so much interesting research around the impact that happiness and social connectivity has on our overall health and wellness, and prosperity, and sort of uh, you know life expectancy even, that I just would encourage people to find those communities that give you energy instead of taking your energy, and continue to engage with those communities. It's been really helpful, I know, for me, and Women of Color in Staffing is certainly one of those groups for me as well. So find other passionate people that share some of your passion points and lean in there. And with that, I just want to thank everybody. I know even just putting this topic into the subject and the webinar, I'm sure probably eliminated some people and brought some people that are hungry for this. And we're all figuring out kind of how to navigate this while staying core to the principles. And I just cannot thank the three of you enough, Myra, Haley, DeLibra, for continuing to engage in this conversation in a thoughtful, pragmatic, and useful way. So thank you all for doing this. And I look forward to Women of Color in Staffing have a version of this conversation that's happening tomorrow as well. And I'd encourage you to be a part of that one because that'll be a slightly different perspective and a really engaging conversation as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And please do reach out if there's anything that we can do to help.